I think one somewhat unpopular take on this film is one that would be a little bit critical of Elphaba. So follow me here. What I mean to say is that what you're getting is something of this Bildungsroman of this character, right? So we have Elphaba is coming into her own power, and we're being taken along through watching her come to herself, right? Watching her grow up, in essence. But it's important to remember that the film poses to us two really interesting things from the beginning. One, we're given the end. We're given the end of the narrative. And so that defines the film, in theory, as a tragedy. When you get an entire character's arc, it is by default a tragedy, right? You have to end it early for it to be a comedy or for it to be happy in some sense, right? Because if you get a character's whole arc, they are in fact going to be dead by the end of it, right? So if you end at their wedding or you end at some other moment in the narrative before that, it's by default generally considered a tragedy. So here, though, we're given the tragedy of our protagonist at the beginning. So that's a whole reframing, right? And it's not one of those like, oh, here's how I died, right? Some films will do that, right? Like, oh, that's me. I'm dead, right? And we're getting the narrative through their eyes, so they're both dead and not dead. In this case, we're being told a story about someone who's dead, but then experiencing the protagonist's experience. But the other thing that's being done is we're beginning with the protagonist's death as celebratory. So we have to kind of recognize that in whatever ways that we're going to connect with, empathize with, and be moved by the protagonist, apparently others are not, right? That they are like, ding dong, the witch is dead. So this presents, I think, a series of questions. Well, how does it happen? Why does it happen? Why are people going to view the main character this way? Will I view the main character this way? And then immediately, I think the fundamental question of the film is presented to us through Glinda, right? Which so much of the narrative, right, is her telling of the story. And what Glinda is presenting to us as the question is, why would someone that is going to identify herself as Elphaba's friend be at the end proclaiming her death, celebrating her death, and then be willing to burn her friend in effigy, right? Which is a really kind of strong and terrible moment, right? Like, I'm going to take this person and burn them in a metaphorical, symbolic sense. So what happens? What could cause this tearing apart of their friendship, so much so that Glinda is willing to betray her friend? And so it positions us, I think, in the space of being a little bit confuddled in terms of who is going to be the hero and who is going to be the villain. But the kind of traditional take tends to be, oh, the person who is the protagonist, the person whose eyes I see through the most, is generally the person I'm going to empathize with, and therefore I'm going to kind of see them as the hero. And then the person who throws up obstacles in their way is the antagonist. So you start to get a sense through the film that Elphaba is the protagonist, if not the hero, and that Glinda is often the antagonist, especially early on. She's throwing the roadblocks. So what I begin to ask myself is well, what's going to be Glinda's villain turn? Like, if the whole film is saying I'm going to turn the traditional take on villain and hero on its head. The original is basically has this rather kind of two-dimensional villain who's just wicked for wicked's sake, um, who's just the antagonist to Dorothy. I'm going to take that person and I'm going to show you why and how they can be sympathized with, empathized with, and also how the rest of a world structure, or rest of a societal structure can actually create a bunch of propaganda, right? That villains are more so created socially than in many cases they are in reality. The novel is, well, it's not a novelization. The novel, which inspired the musical and then which inspired this film, really presents to us the idea that villains are more construction of perspective than they are somehow genetic facts about the world, and that people's genetic facts are more often used against them to help kind of make comfortable villains that make it easy for society to find people to blame. And Elphaba, in many cases in the novel, is more just kind of a victim of circumstance than anything else. Now, the film is taking a stronger stance, I think, about that than just Elphaba being a victim of circumstance. She is someone who is taking a very, very, very strong stance herself in terms of being someone who's going to be a protector, a defender, and an advocate. So her villain turn is really just a matter of being twisted by society, those in power using her to maintain their own power. So what does this all add up to? Well, you have to ask yourself, okay, so what is going to cause Glinda to betray Elphaba? Because Elphaba's turn into villainy is never really a real turn into villainy, right? We sympathize with her the whole time. We see the good that she's trying to do. We see that she's trying to help others. So is Glinda just this kind of like thoughtless bubblehead who has no justification for her action? Because if the film is telling us that villains are more often um, societally constructed and perspectival than they are a fact about reality in many cases, then we have to actually ask of ourselves, each character who's a villain, like, oh, is this person also in some way someone with whom, by taking their perspective and seeing what's going on around them, could actually come to understand that they're not quite as villainous as they seem either, right? That's the kind of the rule of the film to a certain extent, right? That villains are more a matter of perspective than they are matters of reality, and making them matters of reality is really just convenient to us. And it's just a way of being able to have someone that we want to be able to persecute because it makes us feel good about ourselves, makes us feel like we're good, makes us feel like we commit no sins. So I think Glinda, more so than Oz or more so than Morrible, who are kind of more those clear, kind of, in this case, classic villains, and one hopes that one gets also a little bit of glimpse in the ways that maybe they are not as clearly villains as others, as the second film will unfold. But Glinda is right now the best opportunity to kind of look at someone who lets our hero down to some extent, maybe even betrays our hero a little bit, right? Isn't present in the way that she needs to be for our hero. Well, are there ways or reasons to be able to understand from her perspective that her villainy is not really true villainy? Because again, remember, we're trying to get down to why would she be willing to burn her friend in effigy? So there's really two things that stand out to me as kind of clear moments where we see Elphaba act as something of an antagonist for Glinda. And to be clear, one of them is not them fighting over a man. I was really glad to see that the film doesn't really engage that, like, oh, that their principal problem is that they both love the same person. It's an old trope. It's overdone. It's overused. It's boring, and it's also reductive of women. So I was glad to see that that's not the case. Instead, I think that the problems for our heroes in the film tend to be more issues of silence, issues of things that are being hidden, right? The film has that theme of hiddenness over and over again, like Oz being probably the primary example, right? Of being this person behind a curtain, so he's unseen. So over and over again, things should be said that are unsaid. They're trying to deny people voice. So like animals are being denied voice, students are being denied voice. They're trying to silence teachers. So over and over again, there's a question of what's unsaid, what's unseen, what should be seen, what should be said. And so I think Glinda has that experience with Elphaba. There's a point in which Elphaba knows exactly what it is that is bothering Fiyero, causing him to be more distant from Glinda. And Glinda is concerned about it. He seems more distant. He's pulling away. I don't understand. And her friend is standing right there, and she knows the answer. She knows what it is. Now, the answer is somewhat difficult to state. I think the reason why he's pulling away is we kind of had a moment, and I overstepped my own bounds. I really have never had anyone be supportive in that kind of way of my concern for others. And, he was there, and, I touched his face, and it was stupid. And I recognize the fact that from your perspective, you're in a relationship, and that really appears problematic, but it really wasn't a thing. And I'm sorry for that, right? And even if it's not, and this is important again, not an issue of like, oh, I overstepped my bounds with your man. What really is important here is Glinda has a concern regarding her partner, right? She has a concern regarding Fiero, and Elphaba knows the answer and declines to share it. Presumably, they have at least a few minutes on the train for Elphaba to explain what it is. Um, as awkward as that would be, like, okay, well, I'd like to get off the train now. You've really upset me. Where is she going to go? But nevertheless, after the event, she, in theory, could have said, like, in other words, after Elphaba and Fiero have their moment, she could have said something like, I think I've kind of overstepped my bounds. But I think even more importantly, because you could kind of be like, well, that was kind of a nothing, right? It was nothing really happened. Elphaba maybe experienced some feelings that kind of overstepped the bounds of her relationship with Glinda, given the fact that Glinda has a relationship with Fiero. But you might say, well, it's not really nothing. And Fiero really just immediately kind of ended it anyways. Like, he moved right on. He like stepped out of that circumstance. But once it becomes a matter of he's pulling away, I kind of feel like something's going on, something's wrong, and Elphaba says nothing. That is, it kind of gets into their relationship a little bit. It creates a little bit of hiding within the relationship, a relationship that is really based, its strength in it is on revealing and vulnerability, right? So the truth of things kind of coming out and being revealed is kind of how their relationship first begins, right? Elphaba is revealed in all of her humiliation for everyone to see. And Glinda then has caused it, but then also participates in it and reveals and makes herself vulnerable and can be seen as someone who's a full person now, not just right, the kind of facade that she puts on for everyone else to see. And then they engage in the secret sharing, right? And so in discourse, especially for many women and for people who experience feminine discourse, right, the okay, let's sit down and share a secret about each other, about myself with you. That's a big deal. And so that engagement is a series of acts of revealing. And so by not telling Glinda what she knows about why she's having the struggle that she's having, she kind of re engages in a veiling, right? She makes it so that something can't be seen. And so I think that that affects their relationship a little bit. And then when they are in the tower and there's this issue of come with me, right? Over and over and over again, Elphaba has revealed that she is willing to take Glinda with her, right? As she's coming more greatly into her power, and she's coming more greatly into the realization that she is going to be making the stand. She does really kind of pause for a minute, kind of like almost like wakes up from having to deal with everything that she's dealing with, and like looks right at Glinda. It's like, come with me. And Glinda declines, which I think from Elphaba's perspective is an abandonment. And notice in a series of abandonments in her life, right? And it's nevertheless a moment where they both kind of still find a way to kind of accept and love each other. No, I can't go with you on this, but I want you to be happy. I hope this, I truly hope that this works for you. And notice that there is, by the way, a paradox of I hope this works out for you, because in saying I hope that you're happy, there's a genuine concern that that happiness requires logically that the other person not be, right? Because if things work out for Elphaba, that means that things don't work out for Glinda in terms of Oz and his being a good guy from Glinda's perspective, and that it's all a misunderstanding and so on and so forth. And the reverse is also true, right? That if things work out for Glinda, then Elphaba was wrong. She's making a mistake, so on and so forth. So for them to say, I hope you're happy, is really very much a gift. But that being said, there is a point in time that I think that is underutilized by Elphaba when she really comes into her full power, right? She is now a force to be reckoned with. Like, unlike the novel, she's not just a victim of circumstance anymore. She is a powerful person. She has come into it. And importantly, she kind of has to do it by herself, right? This is a personal achievement. She doesn't see her father speaking to her or a mentor speaking to her when she is looking in that reflection, as many heroes might, as they're coming into, like, no, you can do it, son, right? That kind of thing, right? Like, as they're finally reaching their moment, they go from their lowest point to their highest point. No, when she sees someone, she sees herself as a child, right? So it's a psychological moment. It's speaking to the inner child, forgiving the inner child, and most importantly, advocating for the abused inner child. And who's going to advocate for that child? Only Elphaba, right? She's been left alone. Her friend, from her perspective, has said, no, you're going to kind of have to go do this alone. She comes to her own power. And my concern was that it's clear, if I'm Elphaba, I have to know that my friend is Glinda is not in a great position here, right? That things have really heightened, that she looks like she's getting arrested. People are being very, very rough with her. And there's a point in time where Glinda even calls out to Elphaba. And she might be just kind of calling out, like, out of concern, like, get out of here, go, I hope you're okay. But it also could be potentially heard as a call for help, like a call for concern for her own well-being. I think this is the first time in her tremendous privilege that Glinda is in a position of recognizing, like, oh, maybe everything isn't going to be okay for her, right? That maybe all isn't necessarily well. And so I think that there is a moment in which Elphaba, if not even just kind of re-asking, like, okay, so you're with all these guards, and here I am. You can see I actually can fly, and I can take us both, right? You can take my hand if you want. That's my kitty cat, by the way. He says hello. And you could do that, but you don't have to, right? Or she even could just kind of give an order to the rest. Like, as she's making her testament about what she will do and what she will accomplish and the power that she has, she could in fact say, uh, don't don't you dare hurt her, or and I'm going to come after you in the worst of all possible ways. Like, you think you've seen Wicked until you hurt my friend, right? Like, in other words, get your hands off of her, kind of a thing. Now, granted, there's a concern that removes the autonomy from Glinda, and that, right, that she's made her choice and that she kind of has to live with that choice. All I mean to say is that from the perspective of Glinda, this could be very easily turned by other people who are more effective manipulators than Glinda is. Glinda clearly has a want, clearly has a desire, clearly has a very deep wish that she's willing to ignore, like obvious things, like obvious truths, create a delusion for herself. And so she's going to be someone who's easy to manipulate. And we see Morrible step into the void left by what I view as Glinda's only friend, right? Elphaba was the only really true friend, non kind of vapid friend that Glinda has. And she's leaving. And so the result of that ends up being that there's a space in which Morrible can enter. And she's going to take advantage of it. And I think it becomes very easy for someone like Morrible to be able to say, well, your friend abandoned you. She can't really care about you because she left. And she left you with us. So who's really here for you? Who really cares? So this is 4, and he has insisted on getting to be part of the conversation today. So to put a fine point on it and to finish up, I think what we end up seeing is a very important moment here in the film in terms of being able to interpret it as a kind of feminist testament. And by that, what I mean is what the film most clearly is saying by kind of pointing out the fact that that Elphaba kind of leaves behind her friend, right? She leaves behind her hopes, she leaves behind her dreams, but she also has to leave behind, in essence, her family, right? That what ends up happening here is that she is basically a traditional masculinized hero, right? We see that with a lot of heroes, that male heroes will, they have to leave the family. They have to leave the family farm to go out and find their destiny, right? It's like Luke Skywalker having to leave his family behind, right? They leave everything behind to become the hero that they're meant to be. And I think really the problem of that becomes when Elphaba does it, right? Realizing that she's leaving her friend behind as opposed to just making it, okay, well, Glinda's made her own choice. But I think also accepting that there's a sense in which there's a little bit of Elphaba also abandoning her friend. I think that that's important because what it does is it positions us to realize that when Elphaba does it, as opposed to being like, listen, the hero has to make sacrifices. They have to leave the things that they love behind so that they can go off on their adventure and become who they're supposed to become. That when Elphaba does it, well, it's wicked, right? That she's failed femaleness in some sense, right? That she's failed being a good woman. That really, you're supposed to stay at home and take care of the hearth and take care of your family. So, in other words, when a man does it, he becomes a hero. When a woman does it, she becomes a wicked witch. And so, to me, what that reminds me as I'm engaging this beautiful and powerful and significant film is that the rending apart of these friends and being able to recognize the fact that from both perspectives, the other is engaging in a kind of antagonism, like kind of holding them back. And that what Elphaba ends up doing, like her whole narrative is I'm not going to let anything hold me back, including you, right? I am unlimited. I personally am unlimited, right? And that when a man does that, that's awesome. How super of you to do it. But when she does it, the consequences are going to be severe. She's going to be punished by society, right? The misogyny of their society is going to punish her for trying to seek her achievement. And that from Glinda's perspective, right, the loss I think is, at least for the moment, for me at the end of the film, severe. And what is the loss? And the real question, I think, is going to be for Glinda, whether or not she can accept that she let her friend go, right? And her burning Elphaba's effigy at the beginning ends up being a reenactment of letting her friend go, of not just losing her friend, but being the active participant in that. And it's a reminder, I think, to all of us that at the end of the day, that what these two women are dealing with is Oz, the wizard himself, the Wizard of Oz, right? That it's so easy to kind of find oneself going, well, which friend was less supportive and which team am I on? Which is exactly what a system of disempowerment for the empowerment of one would do. That when others try and unite together, when they are stronger together, that what you do as a patriarchal system, what you do as a system of hierarchy, what you do as a system that's trying to entitle one at the expense of many, is you turn them against each other. I think the most powerful realization becomes, at its clearest, is the realization that the real problem, the true antagonist of the film, is the system that's been created to rend others who are stronger together apart. In other words, that whether it's through bumbling or by having picked a effective administrator of his will in Morrible, or by some actual villainous brilliance, that the wizard has constructed a circumstance such that these two people who would be unlimited together will be rent apart. And as much as we want to go like, no, but Elphaba can do it by herself, what we realize is whatever she does achieve by herself, at the end, her own end is going to be one that is tragic, and that they have found an effective way to propagandize it against her. And so the tension is always going to be, have we, by lauding her heroic, solitary, yes, I can do it alone, in the same way that we always laud it when men do it, that we have ignored the error of every single masculinized hero who does succeed by doing it by himself. Always the hidden nightmare of that it's never true. It's always false. You cannot, we cannot do it by ourselves. There is no hero who is truly unlimited alone. Those masculine stories are always a lie. And that, I think, is revealed to us in this film, which is the realization that Elphaba and Glinda are unlimited together, and that the system, the patriarchal system, knows that its hierarchy is most empowered by tearing them apart, but deluding them into believing that they can do it alone. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this review and interpretation. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, please like it. Please comment. It helps with the analytics. Please share with other people and ask them to subscribe as well. If you didn't like it or you think I missed something, which 100% I must have done, comment about it, and hopefully we can have a dialogue about it in the comments, or I can make a video response. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day.